Hi friends, my name is Mel. Welcome back to my channel. I recently read Local Woman Missing by Mary Kubica, and I have some thoughts. I've been seeing this book all over BookTube for the past couple weeks, and it's been getting nothing but raving 5-star reviews. But you guys know by now that I'm a little bit of a cynic and a skeptic when it comes to hype books, so I'm gonna give you my thoughts today in what will probably become a rant review. Now, I gave the book a 3.5-star rating, which to me means the book was kind of meh, but it's not too bad of a review, and I still have a lot to say. I'll start with a synopsis, give you my general complaints about the book, then I'll get into spoiler territory where I recap the main events of the book and discuss my issues with it. I'll start with a mini synopsis just in case you're not familiar with the source material. This book, as the title implies, is a story about a woman who's gone missing, except the twist is that multiple women, including a child, have gone missing. Shelby Tebow is the first to go missing, but not long after, Meredith Dickey and her 6-year-old daughter Delilah go missing from the same neighborhood. The police aren't able to find out anything about these disappearances, so the case goes cold. But 11 years later, Delilah Dickey is found alive and is able to return home. This is a relatively short thriller. It's less than 400 pages, but it covers multiple point of views and it takes place in 2 different timelines, including 11 years ago when the woman went missing, and now, 11 years later. The point of views follow Shelby, who was the first woman to go missing, Meredith, who's the second, Delilah, who's Meredith's 6-year-old daughter that also disappeared, Leo, who's Delilah's brother, and finally Kate, who is a friend of the woman who disappeared. We go back and forth between these 2 different timelines and multiple point of views until the truth is slowly revealed. Moving on to my general complaints and thoughts about the book. Overall, I enjoyed it. As I said, I gave it a 3.5-star rating, which is relatively good for me. I didn't know anything about the book going into it, but I was really intrigued by the prologue and the first chapter, which was from Delilah's point of view. I felt like it grabbed my attention and really held it for a while because I read maybe 25% of the book in one sitting and I didn't even feel the time go by. It was especially interesting to see the events from the perspectives of the woman who went missing. I think my favorite overall point of view was from Leo, Delilah's brother. He was only 4 at the time that she went missing, so it was really interesting to see him kind of meeting her for the first time in a way and describing her return to society. I did find the amount of point of views a little bit overwhelming at times. It's just personal preference, but I prefer to follow maybe 1 or 2 characters at most. Otherwise, I tend to get a little bit bored or more invested in some characters over others. And in this book specifically, I cared mostly about Delilah and Leo, and not so much about Meredith or Shelby. Kate's chapters specifically were especially boring to me, and I found myself skimming a lot of the time because I didn't understand her relevance to the story. The book did really keep me engaged though. There were twists from beginning to end, and I never really knew what was coming. My biggest problem with the book was just the last 50 to 100 pages and the ending itself. I found the plot twist, or the final plot twist, extremely ridiculous and unrealistic, and it really ruined the whole book for me. Sometimes I want the books I read to have some level of ambiguity, to have readers just guessing what happens at the end, but in this book I felt like everything was explained away, and not in a good way either. I feel like if it wasn't for the rushed and messy ending, I would have given this book 5 stars. As part of my deep dive reviews, I like to give a quick recap of the main events of the book. If you're a fan of spoilers, or if you've already read the book, feel free to keep on watching, but if you're still waiting to read it, I suggest you skip ahead to the end. I'll leave a timestamp on the screen to see where to skip to. Okay, so if you're still watching, I'm assuming that you've already read the book or you don't care about spoilers. The book starts off from the point of view of Shelby, who was the first woman to go missing. She's apparently cheating on her husband and her husband is cheating on her. It's kind of weird, but she goes out one day to meet her other lover and she gets hit by a car. Then we shift to Delilah's point of view, who's been in captivity for the past 11 years in a couple's basement. She's with a boy probably around her age, but she hasn't seen his face because she's in the dark all the time. She manages to escape without the boy that I mentioned earlier and hides in a shed until morning. The next day, she's found by a woman walking her dog, and the woman is shocked to find out that it's Delilah, the girl that went missing 11 years ago. The book switches point of views a few times, but ultimately we hear from a couple of different people. Meredith is the mom who went missing, and all you really need to know about her is that she's a self-employed doula working with Shelby, and she's been getting some threatening texts from an anonymous number. We also don't know why, but she was found dead, she committed suicide, and left a note saying that Delilah's fine, but you'll never find her. Then we have Leo, who's basically just talking about Delilah's transition back into society and his dad's grief. There's also Kate and B, who are a couple that are friends with the woman who disappeared. All they really do is interrogate Shelby's husband and her doctor, who she was suing for malpractice. Anyway, we find out a couple things at the end. First of all, the person who was sending those threatening text messages to Meredith was actually someone named Cassandra, who was angry at Meredith for sleeping with her husband 20 years ago. 2, Meredith didn't commit suicide and was actually murdered. 3, Delilah actually isn't Delilah. Apparently the police fabricated evidence to get the case closed. It turns out that the girl they found was actually named Carly, who was abducted by copycat kidnappers who heard about the Delilah case. The real Delilah is still missing. Fourth, Kate and Bea, the lesbian couple, are actually relevant to the story. Meredith and Bea were driving home from a party late night when drunk, and they hit somebody with their car, and it turned out to be Shelby, the person who got run over in the beginning. Bea didn't want to call the police and get in trouble, so they ended up hiding the body. Meredith is consumed with guilt, so they have this confrontation in the garage where Meredith is threatening to call the police, and Bea hits her over the head with a hammer. Just as that's happening, 6-year-old Delilah walks in and witnesses the whole thing. So Bea apparently has no choice other than to fake Meredith's own suicide and hide Delilah so she doesn't say anything about witnessing her mom's murder. So yes, apparently Bea was keeping Delilah alive all these years in the attic above her music studio. So Delilah goes home, Bea is arrested, and they all live happily ever after. This book was definitely a wild ride, and I didn't see any of it coming, but I still had a lot of problems with the book. One of my biggest issues was that details didn't matter. Infidelity was a big theme in the book for some reason. We had Shelby and her husband who were cheating on each other. Then we had Meredith and Cassandra, who thought that she was cheating on her with her husband. Again, this has no relevance to the plot, it was just there. Then there's all the investigative work that Kate and Bea were doing behind the scenes. Kate pretended to be pregnant so that she would get a pelvic exam and ultrasound from the doctor who was being sued by malpractice. Kate and Bea really didn't have a strong enough connection to Meredith or Shelby to justify why they would go to such great lengths to solve this case. I don't know what the point of this horrible invasive procedure even was, because the doctor and his malpractice suit never come up again in the book. All that plot point did was just lead the reader in the wrong direction, and sometimes that's okay, but I just want all the details to tie together nicely in the end. Then there were Cassandra's threatening messages to Meredith. Again, this had no overall connection to the plot. When you think of the whole situation, it just becomes so ridiculous, because Meredith was not sleeping with Cassandra's husband. She slept with him 20 years ago. But when Cassandra found out she was sending Meredith some horrible messages like "rot in hell," "I know what you did," what person would go out of their way to send these threatening messages to somebody over something so petty? There was also that connection between Meredith and Shelby. Meredith was Shelby's doula, and I felt like their connection didn't really factor into how Meredith felt about Shelby's death. She was more so guilty about killing a woman and not really caring that it was Shelby who she killed in particular. There were also a lot of pages about Leo being bullied both in the past when he was 4 and in present day. And again, that didn't tie into the plot. I thought there was going to be something tying that in somehow, but it was not relevant at all. But the bulk of my complaints are with the ending in the last 50 to 100 pages or so. Every plot point related to Delilah was absolutely ridiculous. We have the copycat kidnappers who only kidnapped that other girl, Carly, for 11 years to imitate the Delilah missing persons case. What was weirdest about them was that they gave Carly their real names, and they disappeared from their house as soon as Carly was found, but they ended up coming back a couple of days later and they were arrested. Why would you come back to the scene of the crime? It's just so insane. Carly obviously had some significant trauma from living in the dark in the basement for 11 years, but what didn't make sense to me at all was that she was brainwashed to be Delilah. The people who held her in captivity were showing her newspapers and telling her that she was Delilah, and for some reason she believed it. I mean, 6-year-olds are gullible and all, but I don't think they would believe that they were a completely different person if they were kidnapped. Then we have the actual Delilah. I don't understand how the only way that the family could recognize that Carly was not their daughter was by looking at her cleft chin. I mean, Delilah and Carly looked identical other than that fact, and there was no way you could have told them apart otherwise. There's also that point about the high-ranking police officer fabricating evidence just to make the dad happy that his daughter was found. I understand the sentiment, but I thought it was so ridiculous and surprising for a high-ranking officer to do something so reckless. I think what bothered me the most though was that Delilah had like no actual trauma. She was held up in an attic for 11 years, but in the last page or so, she's happy to be back with her family and she has no trauma whatsoever. She's back into society. I was so invested in Delilah's return, so I was so annoyed to find out that she was just under our nose the whole time. Then there's the whole thing about Bea murdering Meredith and keeping Delilah for herself in her attic. Again, that was ridiculous. Bea is obviously such a psychopath, but none of the characters ever recognized that. Maybe it's just me not being a very attentive reader, but I never got the vibes that there was something wrong with Bea, and all the characters were always describing her as so nice and loving, and I just didn't see it coming at all. There was just no indication that she was ruthless or had something to hide. Looking back, I should have guessed that Kate and Bea had something to do with all of this. The whole time I was wondering why Kate was relevant to the story because she contributed like nothing. Overall, I would have liked the story more if there wasn't the whole plot point surrounding Delilah. I was really invested in her character and I was so disappointed by how the author handled it. All the reveals at the end were just so messy and not well executed at all. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching and staying until the end. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this book because I feel like I'm in the minority here. Also, leave your favorite thriller recommendations in the comments below because I would love to read them. Bye guys!